Hey, so it's another quick one. Finished up. Oh, I forgot about this. Might as well talk about this as well. So I have Flake 8 installed as a dev dependency. I showed you guys that earlier. Here, I'll show it in my pipe project. And essentially, all it is for is to ensure PEP 8, because I'm a stickler for that. I used to use PyCharm at a previous company, and they kind of very strictly enforce PEP 8 like in PyCharm. And so I've just gotten a habit for that. So now I'm like very judicious about doing that, and that's why I have it as a dev dependency, so that at deployment I don't have to install it because it's completely useless otherwise. And when I opened up some of the VENV files, PEP 8 was having there was a couple of PEP 8 violations somewhere, and so I was like losing my mind because it kept showing like a little red dot next to .venv, and then I went into the Flake8 docs, and apparently you can set up like a INI style file, um, which you can call a couple of different things, but .flake8 is one of them, and then there's a couple others I don't remember. Um, I think it was .cfg and .ini itself. Either way, but and then you can set the parameters exclude equals .venv, and then that way, as it's searching, it doesn't. Um, it no longer marks .venv over here like as read. So that's why I added that, because it was driving me nuts. Um, Something else about this I can't remember. Anyways, so back to login config. Um, as a somewhat consolidation of all of this regarding logging modules, essentially, there's a way to set up logging with basic config, and that allows you control over a lot of things actually shown here as well. But dict config is a way to do it in a deeper fashion, and have it all set up right from the get-go, um, so that in your app you're not like spending too much time just logging, too much time setting up like the config of the logger, and just like calling the logger for the appropriate level, parent or child, whatever, and just using that logger, which not very useful at where we are right now. I'm like unnecessarily diving into logging just because it's kind of fun, and it's a fun distraction I'm allowing myself. I'm not going past this. I temporarily thought, I'm like, this logging thing is kind of getting interesting. Let me just turn it into a package. And I'm like, oh, wheels and this and that, and I'm like, you know what? There's a whole level of things to start learning. So I'm like, I'm gonna stop. It's just gonna be a part of my repo, and then maybe someday in the future I'll spin it off into a package, but not right now. Um, so things like formatters, handlers, loggers. So we're just going to go through this file essentially, and just go through what everything is doing. So number one, this is a YAML file. Um, you can also write a JSON or whatever, but I just chose YAML because it's a more commonly used language these days, and it's like a legit language because JSON doesn't even allow comments. Each config JSON is like a separate thing, so you either have like a really hairy super nested loop, or just have multiple documents in one file, which you can separate with these three dashes, and you can have comments and all that jazz, and it's really powerful. And Python's YAML library is also really powerful about interpreting YAML as Python objects, as JSON is also, if I remember accurately. But anyways, so we have the version, which is the first item I'm putting up, and it's necessary because for a weird reason. So it's kind of the only thing that config really needs to be defined. Everything else is just whatever. Um, because essentially there is functionality intended to be developed which allows for being able to track the config version, and so it needs to always be passed. um, and just to make the code future proof, they enforce that everyone has this key set up and that it's always set to one, just so that if someone from the future goes to code in the past, it's still like backwards compatible and there aren't any issues. Okay, disable existing loggers false. So it's exactly what it says. If there's any loggers whenever dict config is called, they will all be disabled except for the root logger. Um, so this was driving me weird because I didn't have this set, and apparently if it's not set, it defaults to true. And my UV corn logs weren't coming through. I'm like, what's going on? And then it turned out it was this. The other thing you can do is also incremental, and you can set this to true. And if this is set to true, disable existing loggers is automatically disabled, because what incremental true actually does is it makes it so that whatever you're describing in this call to dict config updates like the previous overall config, not like just replaces it. Um, um, yeah, so there you go. Formatters. That's exactly what it sounds like. It's just like literally a formatter. So here, it's a bunch of key value pairs. You can describe multiple formatters. I've just done one called MC, which I think I called it MC because it's like most covered. Because it's like I feel like this basically covers almost all the information I really need out of a format. Uh, and then I put style with this curly brace because so essentially the logging formatter, there's a couple of different ways to do string formatting in Python. There's old school style, which starts with a percent sign. Then there's this curly braces style. And then there's another style called templates, which you use with a dollar sign. I was just really accustomed to this one, so I switched from the percent style to this. It's like much more readable to me. Just ASCII time, level name, name, message. Name stands for logger name, by the way. Right, so that's what a formatter is. And each of these kind of build on each other. So you need the formatter for the next thing, which is handlers. Handlers are also like key value pairs. So I have a terminal handler. I can call it whatever. I can call it Mr. Butthole if I want. But I'm just calling it terminal here because that's what this logger is going to be for. It's just the basic terminal for now, at least. You define the class, which has to be the full qualified path. So if it's logging.stream handler, blah, 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 blah. I'm setting the level to debug now. I think I won't make a huge thing of this in the next video, but I'll probably also add an additional document and have like a dev and a prod logging system. Actually, no, I'll just have one for now, and then later on I'll switch between a dev and a prod. With maybe like an environment variable or a .env file. Actually, I'll have a .env file. Yeah, I'll do a .env file, and I will split this up so that I have a prod and I have a dev logging config. Actually, no, I won't split that up because here's the thing. The only thing I care about being different between them is just the level. So maybe I'll just use an environment variable for that. I don't know. I don't want to overthink this right now. I'll get to that later. But I set the level to debug. This is why I'm like getting into this weird headspace of like I don't know how to deal with this because I want debug on dev, but info on prod, basically. But we'll get to that later. Whatever. And we use the formatter we defined earlier with MC. Boom. That's what a handler is. So what this says is this handler with this ID should be instantiated with this class. Class can be a constructor, so we'll do that later as well because, spoiler alert, I created a bunch of coding exercises for logging. Um, Hopefully it'll be short after this initial bump because I just didn't want to copy paste from ChatGPT. Um, the reason, since this is being passed to dict config in multiple places where you'd have to say logging dot, you don't have to in the very next section normally be logging dot debug, but it understands debug. But the class key always needs the full qualified path to the class object because essentially someone can create their own logging class. Oh my god. Oof. My nose. So we had a whole logging class. If someone wants to create their own handler class, which I don't know how to do that, but if you can just pop that into the class. I set the level, I set the formatter, and then the loggers, right? So that's what you get with get logger, and you just have to do that at the start of each file to get the logger. Set the level of the logger, set whether it should propagate. So propagate essentially means is wherever the log happened, if that logger has handlers, it'll handle it, and then it'll send it back up, and then send it back up, and it'll keep sending it up so that each parent, including the root, obviously past the root it won't propagate, can handle the log with its own handlers. So for example, you can have a high level parent log, which I'm just going to call app, and that logger has a handler. You can see here the terminal handler, and you can have multiple handlers on a single this thing. What it does is this process essentially helps streamline the process. So you could have this terminal handler and maybe a couple of other handlers. So if you have a file handler or whatever, something that needs to be on all of your loggers, just put all those handlers here. And then, for example, if you have a group of endpoints or something, or a group of functions that's doing some really critical tasks, and you want that critical task to go through PagerDuty or something like that, you could set the logger for that level. Let's say it's a database module or whatever. So it would be app.db, the child logger of app. And that particular handler essentially has a level of critical and higher, and will only catch critical errors. But then that handler is an SMTP handler as well as the PagerDuty handler, so it sends a PagerDuty and sends an email right at the same time. Well, technically, if you send a PagerDuty, you can configure PagerDuty to send an email, but that's a different story. You just keep you can do that, and you can do it in a succinct way. If DB had several other child loggers, you don't have to define it on each one. You can just define it once, and then all the ones below them will just pop up to app.db. It'll do the PagerDuty, it'll do the SMTP, then it'll go back further up, and then it'll do the other two. So you just got to be careful to not have the same handler define multiple layers. So if I put terminal on app.db, I'm not sure about this actually, but I think that would just double log the thing. So yeah, that'll cause issues. Yeah, and so that's our logging YAML file. What's up? Talking YAML. That's the name of the episode. Bye.